Welcome to the MuseCast, where we squeeze every last drop of inspiration out of Sunday's sermon.
Yay! Everybody! Party time! Look who's back. Dan Kent. Yes, he's back. He's come back to the show. He's no longer a wayward son. He's even back in Minnesota and just thriving.
Yes, of course. Yeah, I love it. I exchanged white sandy beaches for something else that's white and not quite as fun to lay around in. But it's good to be home, back at it. And I tell you what, I recommend taking a vacation. That it really helps. All those people who say you should take a vacation, they're on to something there. I think it's
they might have a little insight, right?
Yeah, I feel very refreshed. So yes,
I am so thankful and glad that you took a vacation, Dan, because it wasn't. I mean, like a lot of times we'll take time off, but we'll still do, certain things in our work week. But you guys, you and Barb, you needed to celebrate and just.
Mm-hmm.
Recharge and just be with each other, and that's amazing. I'm so glad you did that. Yeah. But I'm super glad that you're back.
Yay! Yeah, I thought okay. I thought the 2 episodes that I was gone, the Schraub cast. I don't know about that. That's that's.
I was hoping you were too far out at sea to be able to tune into that one.
Rob did a great job. You did awesome. Just the branding. You have to work on the branding a little bit, I think. So.
I know. You're Danny Jingles. You're the one who comes up with the name. Listen, that was just payback because when you had Danny Churchill on, you guys renamed the show. So I had to follow suit. And I didn't go Shreg cast last week.
That's right. Yeah.
That would have been weird. Oh, goodness.
That's funny.
I do feel like we need to take a moment to just really appreciate Dan and his presence. And he didn't get stranded on an island somewhere. He came back to us, and he didn't come back at an ideal time weather-wise, but he loves us so much that he said, forget about it. I'm coming back.
That's right. I let me also say, I don't want to forget this because I just think it's awesome that you did change your bookshelf and you did put a light bulb above your head. And I just think that is genius. And I can't wait until you get a really great idea so we can see it in action.
So that's gonna be. This is like, I think I just shot myself in the foot because I haven't yet figured that piece of it out. So it's gonna look like I never have a good idea because it's just gonna be dim. So we'll have to imagine. That. Okay, Dan, I really feel like we need to just take a moment to just to check in with you and just see, like, I know you said taking the time away was good, but like, is there anything that you want to just share with us about your vacation time? I mean, not details of your vacation, but like anything that, like, you just think, oh, the MuseCast people, this would be cool for them to know.
Yeah, boy, it's hard to. There's like, you're right. There's details. There's more abstract things, and there's different levels in between. And for me, I it felt good because, like, even though I was on vacation, we took a cruise. I've never been on a cruise before, and we got to island hop a little bit, and it's way beyond stuff that I normally do. But I wanted to watch. I wanted to see the discussion, and so that made me feel good. Like, even being away, I still wanted to see what was going on. And so I'm grateful to be a part of something that even I'm interested in when I'm not there. So that made me happy. Also, I missed the community, and I missed the church, and that feels good too, to when you take some time away and you're excited to be back with the people. That's always a good thing. So those would probably be my 2 big kind of takeaways as it relates to Woodland Hills. Greg had a couple great sermons, and it's weird because, like, I have my master's degree is in theistic philosophy, so it's basically this series And this is the series that I take my first vacation in 7 years. It's so I kind of felt like the timing is really weird on that. So, but that's the way it went.
Maybe the Lord just knew, because he controls everything. You know that, right?
Right. Yeah.
So maybe he just knew that Dan's already an expert in all this stuff. Let him have a break. Let him just go off with his wife and celebrate being married and just enjoy. So I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, it is good to have you back. I'm going to overlook the fact that you didn't name me specifically and the things that you missed. I'm just gonna include.
Well, yeah. When I said, hold on a second. Now, wait a minute. Whoa. Now, when I say that I missed the MuseCast, that is you. You're like the foundation of it. I'm just the class clown, and I'm here for legal documents. I do the summary and I fill in the appropriate paperwork. That's all. You are the MuseCast. So
you are ridiculous. Well, welcome back, friend. And I'm glad that you tuned in and you knew what was happening around here. You were missed, and it's really good to have you back. And Greg, I will say, of all of the topics that we are going to and have already covered in this series, and even in the history of Woodland Hills, I think this one personally is like the bullseye. And I say personally because I know this is something I've struggled with, problem of evil. And this is something I hear so much from other people. Well, if God is so this, then why A, B, C, D, E, F, why all of this crap? And I think so I'm really excited to talk about it. I'm excited to hear your summary. Again, the title of the sermon escapes me. So I need you, Dan. I need you.
Does everything happen for a reason? Does everything happen for a reason? That's what it is. I tell you what,
everything happened for a reason.
Your light bulb is very dim today. Well, I'll say that.
It's not lighting up at all. Oh goodness. Oh well. Bear with me. Okay, so does everything happen for a reason? So I was really, I loved this sermon, but I cannot wait to hear your summary and have this discussion. We got a great question in, and so if you are ready, sir,
I'm
to
ready.
Jump back in,
let's do it. Yeah, it feels good. I'm back at doing summaries, and it feels good to be back doing this. So yeah, does everything happen for a reason? We're looking at the problem of evil and suffering. And Greg, there's so many different angles and nuances, and I really like the way that Greg did it. He just kind of said, okay, this is sort of like a traditional kind of response that we might hear that we think is wrong, which says that evil and suffering happens according to God's plan. It's God's will that these things happen, and there could be a lot of explanations for that about why God would will or plan or want evil and suffering. It could be because we learn something from it and it shapes us, and or maybe it's to punish us for something, which is just another way of trying to correct us. And so there's like this soul making kind of reason why God does this, or it could be because it somehow brings glory to God, and that's more of an abstract explanation. But the problem with all of that is that each of those times when you say that this wicked thing that happened, this suffering, this evil that happened, well, God willed that, he wanted that because it brought about this thing that he wanted in us, this lesson or this punishment or something like that. It's really hard to look at that and not say that evil thing served a good purpose, and it was something that God wanted. And if it's something that God wanted so that he could accomplish a goal, well, what is evil then? It sounds like that's pretty good. And so it sort of causes problems with just understanding what is good and evil. But beyond that, Greg notes that when Jesus is here and he sees all of these evil things like leprosy and so forth, he never says that God wanted that. He doesn't say that this is part of God's will. He fights against it. He heals people. He casts these things out of people. And so if Jesus is the full manifestation of God, if he's like the full sort of revelation of who God is and God's character, the fact that he's always healing people and getting rid of their evil and suffering suggests that maybe those things are not really part of what God wants, and that's not part of God's will. And so Greg offers, in response to this kind of traditional view, kind of these 4 points, or these 4 kind of ideas to kind of build a different explanation for why these things happen. And the first point is that God gives us free will and moral responsibility. In other words, God gives us this autonomy where we can make choices and we can affect things in God's creation. And because he wants us to freely love, he wants us to freely grow and to do good. Now, in order to freely do that, we also have to have an alternative. And so in other places, Greg has talked about the principle of proportionality, this idea that our ability to do good is roughly equal to our ability to do evil. And so God allows us to have this full range of free will and autonomy so that ultimately our love can be genuine and authentic. The second part of that is that because God gives us real autonomy and gives real say-so over his creation to us, that means that sometimes things are not the way that God wants it to be. God does not always get what he wants. And we see this in many places in the Bible and in the Old Testament. And the first kind of big one is in Genesis 6, where God regrets making humanity. I mean, he's like, this is not going the way that I want it to go. And so this idea that evil and suffering is part of God's will, right away, it's like, wait a minute, so many times you see that God does not want things happening the way that they're happening. So it seems like not everything that happens is God's will. And the third point is that this free will and this autonomy that God gives, it's not just to us. There's also a spiritual kingdom. There's a spiritual council. The Old Testament talks about the council of God, and that there are these agents who they're not like us. They're like us, but they're not physical like us in the earth. They're spiritual, and they have real say-so also, and they have that say-so over creation. And so we find that Jesus, when he is healing people, he's talking as if he is pushing back against a spiritual force that is contrary to God, that has rebelled against God. And that implies that a lot of the evil and suffering that we experience is either directly or indirectly related to these spiritual forces that have rebelled against God. And then the fourth kind of point that Greg makes is simply that even though there is this real autonomy and say-so that can go against God, God promises that love will win in the end, and that all of the evil and suffering that we experience is not worth comparing to the glory that we'll experience when we are with God and when there is real shalom. And so that's sort of a sermon. I skipped over a lot of stuff as per typical, but what did you think of Greg's sermon and his treatment of this problem?
Oh gosh, like I said, I kind of let the cat out of the bag, but I loved it. I love when we can address this very big elephant in a very tiny room, yeah. Because I just feel like there is no way you can go a day in your life without recognizing how out of whack things are. Things are bonkers, and many of us, I think every single one of us has experienced that in some way, shape, or form, and to varying degrees. And the fact that we talked about it, I thought was great. I loved his 4 points there. I thought that was really helpful. And of course, I love the story that he started out with, because I think that just kind of made it real for folks, and made it tangible. And it made me remember this. So I want to say, like, when I was a teenager, maybe young adult, there was this book I was reading, and it talked about, it was one of those like purity book, like I Kissed Dating Goodbye type of books, not that book in particular, but with that type of book. Okay. And it was talking about this couple who had gone down to the riverbank to hang out, and they were Christians, and a person came upon them and murdered them both. And it was all,
Oh my goodness.
I should not tickle. Why am I laughing? It was, it
What kind
wasn't
of books
funny,
were
and
you
it's not
reading?
oh, what was wrong with me? But in this, and so the lesson was, they were doing things they shouldn't have been doing,
Oh
and
my
so
goodness.
therefore God had to teach them this lesson. And I remember as I was reading the book thinking, gosh, that's what happens when you take yourself out of the umbrella of
Wow.
God's protection and you do things you're not supposed to do. I remember thinking that.
Wow.
And then cut to a few years later, married, no kids yet, but reading a very popular devotional book. And I think it was day one, and it was talking about the sovereignty of God. And it talked about how everything in your life, on day one, I want to encourage you with this. Everything in your life was ordained by God because he is sovereign. He needed it to happen. He wanted it to happen to bring him glory. And I immediately flashed back to crap in my life, literal. I've told you guys about some of this stuff. And I threw the book across the room, and then I was like, screw that. Honest. I mean, sorry.
Right.
Screw that. And that began my journey of discovering who is God and why does crappy things happen, awful things, traumatic things, inconvenient. Like, why do we experience all of this in a world that he created? And so all of that to say, loved this message, loved that Greg took us through this, loved that he addressed it. And I just love the feedback that we're already hearing. And I think it's a real issue that many people would point to as to why they say no thank you and have thrown their hands up, or thinking about throwing their hands up and just walking away from the faith, God, all of it.
Yeah.
I've been there. Like, I've literally been there.
Yeah. Well, and I think you and I are probably similar in our kind of presuppositions, that because I agree with you. Like, I don't understand how people can follow a God who plans and wants these evil things to happen. I just don't. I don't understand that. But I do know of Christians who that brings them profound comfort. I don't understand.
Yeah.
For me, just being able to see that there is an alternative way of looking at this is so liberating, because for me, and I've talked about this as well, but like I can endure and I can handle just about any evil and suffering if I know that there is a good, trustworthy God on the other side of it. And for me, I can't trust God as being good if everything that I see that is evil is something that he wanted to happen. Well, because what does good even mean at that point? And so I have a hard time trusting that there is this God on the other side if he is also responsible for the things that caused me all the pain and suffering to begin with. And so for me, these ideas are also just fundamentally liberating, and it allows me to worship God, knowing that God is not the evil and the suffering that I see around me. He is this refuge that I can seek in the face of all of this stuff.
Yeah, that's why I loved Greg's second point so much. And again, it was one of those things, like, it's not hugely profound, and yet it is hugely profound, right? Like God doesn't always get his way.
Yeah.
And I it's like, I know that, but just to hear it again in the way in which it was said this past weekend, it's just like, yeah, God does not always get his way. An all-powerful God could have arranged things so that he does control everything, but he didn't do that. He wanted relationship, and he wanted love, and he wanted us to have say-so. And that means sometimes our say-so does not align with his heart and his desires, and he doesn't always get his way. And I thought that was a really cool point that Greg made. And I think it's something for us to remember. And then leading into the fact that we're not the only free agents in the game, right? There are powers and principalities and other forces at work. And so that's something I think we have to consider seriously. And that's also where it gets a little murky and frustrating, because we don't have a perfect formulaic answer. Like, we can't say, well, A plus B equals, 1 + 1 is 2. We can't do that because the variables are infinite. And that's kind of annoying to accept as truth.
Yeah. That's really well put. In fact, I think I saw a little bit of light in that bulb when you were talking, just a little bit. I don't know how, but there was, yeah, I don't know how it works, but
a little shimmer.
Yeah.
Oh, hey, we did get a great question in from Ted.
Yes.
Yeah, Ted. He has 2 first names. He has 2
that's right.
first names as his first and last name. So I always, even when I'm talking to him, I'm like, ooh, yeah. So anyway, it's a great question. Is this you wanna go
let's
there?
do it. Yeah.
Okay.
Also, let me just say, as another person with 2 first names, I get it, Ted. It's tough. Life is hard, but let me just assure you that this was not God's plan. This was your parents' problem. It's their fault, not God's. So yes.
They had free will, Ted.
Yes, they did.
They did that. Okay, so Ted said, isn't God powerful enough, and doesn't he love me enough to not let this happen in my life? And I'm thinking this could be any of the 1,018 different awful things. And if not, why? And where does prayer and faith figure in?
Yeah. Well, there's a few questions there. I guess I didn't realize that when I first read it on YouTube.
3 in 1.
Yeah, right. So let me just talk in Ted's general direction and see what I can do. But for me, I come back to, God gives us real free will, and we have this capacity to choose good or bad, and we have because of the power that we have, we can hurt other people, and that's real. That's part of our choosing bad is it can hurt other people, and I think that does God have the power to prevent that? Well, yes, of course. He's the ground of all being. He's the one who created this capacity for free will, so he could shut it off at any time, and he could overpower. We've seen that in the Bible where Jesus just overpowers things, and he calms storms, and he walks on water and does all of these things. And so God definitely has that capacity to do that. But creating autonomous people is a very high level ontological act. If you're going to give the person autonomy, you have to allow them to do things that disappoint you and that maybe even hurt you. And even if you look at Adam and Eve, people I've heard people say, well, when Adam and Eve, disobeyed God, or they were disloyal to God and they ate of the apple, well, why didn't God just start over? And it's like, well, okay, if you have a choice between A and B, eating of the apple or not eating of the apple, and every time you eat of the apple, God squishes you and starts over, well, then that's not really a free choice. That's not authentically an option. And so there is no freedom in that. And so to a certain extent, God has to allow us to disappoint him. But the second part of my response is this. I did a sermon last summer called "Life is Hard, We Are Strong, God is Good," and it's an idea that I keep cogitating on because I feel like there's been like a popular position, and then there's been this reaction to it, and whenever that happens, we a lot of times we'll throw the baby out with the bathwater. And I think that this is a case of that, where you've had like this John Wayne Christianity, pull yourself up by the bootstraps. You got to be tough and hard and all of that kind of stuff. And there's been this reaction to that where, no, we need to be vulnerable and we need to be compassionate. And I think that reaction is right. However, the fact is that we are strong, we are tough, and God made us where we can tolerate things. I mean, look at the stories of the martyrs and the things that they endured, and praising God as they're burning at the stake. And you read stories of people in Auschwitz and how they found hope and how they survived. And Viktor Frankl even talks about finding meaning in these profound kind of things. And you see what humans are capable of enduring. To me, I see God as trusting that even though things might not happen the way that God wants it to happen, he has made us with the capacity to endure and to continue to grow in Christ-likeness and to continue to find more and more dimensions of this good God. And the fact is that the story for most of us, unless God comes back, is going to end in utter defeat. We're going to die. And so we really have to trust that promise that this, even facing death, ultimate kind of physical defeat, is something that God knows that we can handle. And so what is there that we can't handle? What is there that God could allow in his creation that we couldn't handle, if we can even handle that? And so for me, yes, God could end it all, but he would be sabotaging this authentic love in the process. And the fact that he allows such horrible things to happen, if you go back to the principle of proportionality, just shows you how wonderful and glorious the love is that God allows all of this stuff for. And so to me, that's how, the only way that you can make sense of it. Because remember, and I'm talking a lot here, I know, but remember, if you take God out of the equation, you're still faced with the evil and the suffering and all of that. What Christianity is saying is that there is a good and loving God who is the ground of all being, who is promising us this opportunity for eternal fellowship and shalom.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, I guess, how I would respond. Prayer, I don't know, prayer works in all of that in a different way, and I would have to respond to that at a different time, because I just spent 5 minutes on just the first part. So what do you think, Shawna, about that?
Yeah, I think prayer does tie into it. I know that we can pray and we can impact outcome because of our faith in our prayer, but even that, there are variables involved. And we've both been in situations when we both talked about awful things that happened even after we prayed, deaths that happened in our lives, even after we fervently and faithfully prayed. And so even that's not a formula for a guaranteed outcome. The most important thing to me is that, yes, I agree 110% with you that we have this eternal promise. And so even the ultimate defeat isn't really defeat, because we have victory in eternity. And in the meantime, we have a God who's not aloof, who isn't distant, who actually is in the middle of it with us and is aching and hurting with us. When broken things happen in a broken world by broken people, Christ is there in the midst of that. And I want to be vulnerable and honest and say to Ted, I've had those same questions. In all honesty, I wish God would have put like a little disclaimer clause in the free will thing, like no kids, right? Like no children can be harmed by your free will, or you know what I mean? Like no, like you can't hurt other people. Like, I don't know. I just wish there was a protected group in that, because it does just seem awful. But then I know that as soon as you control or take away true free will from one, it has a ripple effect, and you can't do that without taking it away from another. And so either it's really kind of an all or nothing. Either we have free will, and as human agents we have free will, and spiritual agents have free will, or we don't. It's not a false free will. Like with my dog Finn, he has a false, like he thinks he can go out into the yard and do what he wants and go where he wants, but he can't because he knows if he doesn't come when I call him, he's going to get shut outside, and he's not going to like that. So, and so he comes, right? Like he thinks, oh yeah, I'm running. Yeah, no, he there's control there, but it's just not something that he's fully aware of. That's not the way it is with us and God. Thankfully, he truly does give us free will. And that means it's for all of us. And that means that a lot of times there are horrible consequences as a result of that, that fact. And so I think that's just one of those things that we'll have to discuss with him when we get the moment in eternity to say, okay, couldn't you have at least said this person's off limits or this people group or what, but he didn't ask me.
Yeah. Well, I for one will be praying for Finn. So it's cold out there.
I would not. Oh my gosh, I would never. I literally, like the other day, he went out and he was just supposed to go and come right back because it's cold, right? And he decides he wants to run around to the back, and I was like, Finn, come, and he didn't come, and so I just stepped inside and closed the door at like 2 seconds, and then I opened the door and he's right there, like, oh my God, what happened? Let me in. Where'd you go? So he's good. He's fine.
That's awesome.
Dan, we could spend hours if we dive deep into this whole variable aspect of it. If we want to play out the free will aspect of things, and we don't have time for that. So what can you say that could be of some sort of comfort, not really explanation, but some sort of comfort to just that reality that there are so many things going on at the same time that sometimes we don't have an answer on this side of eternity as to why certain things occur in life.
Yeah, I think for me, if God has given genuine autonomy and there's real say-so that God gives out, and if it's true that things happen that God might not want to happen, then looking at suffering and looking at evil and saying, why did that happen? Well, that's kind of a futile kind of venture because there was no reason for it other than whoever brought it about caused it, or it was an earthquake and there was no reason for it to begin with. It was just the suffering of this world. But what I would come back to is just seeking God as a refuge and continuing to pursue the trustworthiness of God's character, because that is something that we can learn about as we study the scriptures and as we have contemplative meditative time with Jesus or whatever. That is something that we can have answers to. We can't answer why did my daughter experienced or die or whatever. There is no reason for it. It's evil, it's suffering, and God did not want it to happen. But we can learn about God's loving character and his faithfulness and his trustworthiness. And that is where our ultimate hope is. And that, for me at least, more than anything else, has calmed my heart and given me a sense of peace about the evils of the world.
Yeah, I love that, Dan. It reminds me really quickly, and then we're going to go to Nugget time. So you will be back at Nugget time for the first time in a few weeks. But it reminds me of the focus passage that Greg shared from Luke. And that came alive for me in a different way this week when he was talking about when they told Jesus about the Galileans whose blood Pilate had mingled with their sacrifices, and he was like, they asked him, like, do you think that because these Galileans suffered in this way, that they were worse sinners than all the other, just like saying, and what about these people who that tower fell on? Was their sin so great that they got, and Jesus's response was not what they were expecting. And I think that's something that we need to be mindful of. I think that we can look for when big tragic things happen, or when smaller tragic things happen, when stuff happens that is not in line with what we are desiring or wanting or praying for. I think we can look for, is it because of this? Is it because of this? And that is futile, because even if we knew the exact answer, it's not going to necessarily change what happened or bring us the comfort that we think that it will. And so I just think we need to be careful to not, especially when it's with other people and situations like, oh, that country's suffering because, blah. I just think we have to be really careful about that, because we do not have the mind of God, the wisdom of God. We don't know all of the variables, all the reasons as to why things occur. And I don't think we can oversimplify it in that way.
No, I think that's exactly
All
right.
right.
Yep.
Okay. Dan Kent.
Yes.
Are you ready?
Am I ready? Of course I'm ready. Woo!
Infamous nuggets. Yay! Yay! All right, Dan, it is nugget time. Let us hear your nugget.
Oh, I should start. Okay, good. Well, I think really building on what you just said, it's when you say that, everything is part of God's plan, and you have something really horrible happen, like, a friend or a relative or a child die of cancer, if there's a reason for it, well, you're going to spend all of your time trying to discern what that reason might be, and that's just so, like, not only are you looking for the reason, but you're also trying to reconcile how could a loving, good God do this? Even what reason could there be for God to do something so horrible? And what does the victim of that get out of that reason? But if it's teaching me a lesson, would it really cost my loved one? I mean, there's just a madness to that. But the bigger madness is that it's really hard for you to spiritually heal from that when you're always looking for a reason that doesn't exist. Mm-hmm. And I think that with this idea that God gives real autonomy, things happen that God does not want to happen, well, that now suddenly gives us a God who is not plotting against us to teach us a lesson or anything like that, but rather when the child or the relative or whatever suffers, God is grieving with us, and we can now actually grieve, we can lament, and we can heal, because we're not striving for this impossible answer to a question that should never be asked to begin with. And so for me, how you view God in these situations really makes all the difference, both in your relationship with God, of course, but also in how you can heal from whatever it is that happened. I tell you what, there's no evil or suffering that can happen where I can grieve it, and it's always going to be better if God is grieving with me. And I can feel like I can now heal because God also agrees that is evil. And it's so comforting. That's a God who comforts. The God who caused it or wanted it, that's not comforting at all. But the God who sees it as, no, that's not what I wanted, now suddenly I can have full trust in that God's character again. And when that God promises that there will be peace, and that God promises that there will be healing and reconciliation, I can, even though I'm still suffering, and even though I'm still lamenting and grieving, it doesn't fracture my relationship with God. And related to that, this is two nuggets, but as we look at life, it's just more motivation to continue to pursue that relationship with God, at this ground of all being, this good, loving creator, who is promising shalom, and who is promising just profound kind of relationship with him. And so I guess that's sort of I'm a little rusty on the nuggets, so that's
you're good.
Probably the best I have.
You're given a value pack.
Yeah, that's right.
Today.
Yeah.
Not just a singular nugget. You're getting 3-4 piece nuggets. So that's good. That's good. No, that was beautifully said, Dan. And I just want to piggyback off of that. It is as if God is saying, yeah, that sucks, and that was hurtful, and that, your heart is breaking, and my heart is breaking. That is like him kind of entering into what we are experiencing it and validating it, versus being like, well, that'll show you.
Yeah,
I guess you'll learn, then that doesn't validate our feelings. That it just brings more hurt and shame. And so if we look at who Jesus is, and that is the full, complete revelation of who God is, then we know that God responds the first way and not the latter. He enters in, and his heart breaks when our heart breaks. and things happen that he does not want. And I think we need to remember that. But I also want to say, Dan mentioned this earlier, that if you have experienced something in your life and it brought you comfort to think that God was in that and caused it, and some, like, if that brings personally you comfort, then hold on to that. If that's how he is comforting you, hold on to that. I would just say, don't put that on other people. Like, if someone else is going through something, then just because that brought you comfort doesn't necessarily mean it's going to bring them comfort. And most times that's going to actually compound the pain and the hurt. And finally, I'll just end with, I just think it's so important to remember the nature of who God is, and know that right now in this space, in this time, things are able to happen that he doesn't want, but there will come a time when he says, that's it, that's enough. And he will reign victorious. And then we get to do that with him. So there will be no more sickness and suffering and disease and death and trauma. And there will be no more awful things happening to kids, and the land won't like erupt and kill millions of people. Like all of that will cease. There will come a day. This will not happen for forever and ever and ever. Amen. There will come an ultimate victory. And I do think it's important to remember that and to hold on to that. And in the meantime, know that he is walking hand in hand with us right here, crying when we cry, aching when we ache, joyful when we're joyful, so he is that close of a relational God to us. So
yeah,
that's my nugget.
That's awesome. That's great.
All right. Dan, what do you say we circle back next Tuesday and do this again, you and I?
Sounds good to me. Sounds good to me.
Sounds good. Welcome back. I do want to say thank you to Rob Kitzler and Greg Boyd for sitting in your seat the last 2 weeks, but it is so good to have my partner in crime back. So thank you to those guys. But yay, Dan is here. So he's going to be here next week too. So that'll be great. Thank you guys for tuning in. Thanks for the great questions, and looking forward to chatting later. I'm technically on vacation now, so hopefully I'll be in a place where I can hop on the chat, but if not, I know Dan's got it. So
yeah, I didn't know
later. Yeah,
really quick. I didn't know if that was public or not, that you're on vacation. So now that you mentioned it, I just want to say,
I did
look at the dedication to the MuseCast that Shawna is exhibiting here. I mean, that is some serious dedication. So I'm impressed.
Yeah, honestly, I appreciate that. And there could be an element of your first Tuesday back, and what the heck would you do? What would you do? Right.
Well, and I'll just say,
on your own.
You really disappointed LeBron James, because he was supposed to be on with me, but then you decided
I know. I kind of, yeah.
Good to be back.
All right. Well, see you. Glad you're back. Great connecting with you guys. Have an awesome week, everyone. We'll check you out next week.